Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're taking care of yourself and doing something fun. Today, our Critter Chat is going to talk about an animal that many of us are familiar with, and some may even have living in. Today, in our Critter Chat, we're going to be talking about parrots. Now, if you're like me, you probably have heard of several different kinds of parrots or seen several different kinds of parrots, and you may think, wow, there's kind of a lot of parrots out there. I kind of thought that would be somewhere in like the 50 to 75 species numbers. I was very wrong. There are between 350 and 400 species of parrots. So it is a very large group of bird species. All parrots do have some commonalities. They have a curved beak. That beak is usually very sharp at the end. I have been bit by several parrots. I don't recommend it. They are called zygodactyl, which means they have 4 toes, but on a parrot, it's 2 toes forward, 2 toes back. And with that, they're really good at climbing and being able to grab onto a lot of things. They can also hold things in their claws. Typically, a big parrot like a macaw or a cockatoo can hold something pretty good size, like the size of a walnut, in its claw and hold it up to its beak while its beak kind of pries those bigger nuts or fruits open. They also typically like to eat those kind of things. So they eat fruit, flowers, nuts, seeds, nectar, and some species specialize in eating different kinds of insects or bugs. And a few even are a little more crazy and will eat some other small animals. Most parrots live in warm places, so they prefer a warm climate, typically around the tropics, but they are most concentrated in South America and Central America, and then across the ocean from there in Australia and the islands north of Australia up into Asia. Now, there are parrot species in other places. There are definitely some parrots in Africa, and there's some feral populations in North America and Europe. So aside from Antarctica, you can find parrots living on their own in pretty much most areas of the world. Parrots are often kept as pets, especially a couple groups of parrots like the macaws. Those are the big ones that are bright colors. Amazon parrots, which are a little bit smaller, they're kind of usually a green with like yellow on their head, sometimes red. Cockatiels, those are the kind of skinnier ones with the little crest on their head. Or cockatoos, those are their bigger cousins that also have a little crest of feathers on their head. And then the parakeets, which are typically the smaller little birds that kind of have the parrot-like shape and a longer tail feathers. Oh, and also lovebirds. Lovebirds are also a parrot and also sometimes kept as pets. They are kept as pets for many reasons, but people find them to be kind of beautiful, charismatic, intelligent, colorful. Sometimes people like the noises they make. And some parrots have been taught to talk or to mimic human sounds. Now, sometimes they know sounds in addition to like a human voice saying words that they will also mimic. So they'll sometimes mimic the sounds of appliances or alarms or the radio, different music, that kind of thing. But they are pretty quick to pick up on that. But they're not the only birds who can do that. There are birds all around us who can pick up sounds. Here in LA, where I live, we have mockingbirds that are very good at learning different sounds, particularly car alarms. But they are very good at mimicking sounds as well. Parrots are highly regarded as one of the most intelligent groups of birds. It's kind of a big competition. Who's smarter, the parrots or like the crows and the ravens? And I'll be doing a whole episode about them on a future date, so look forward to that. Now, parrots are currently listed by the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. That's a big international group. They're sometimes referred to as CITES. So CITES got together and said that the ban of the sale of any wild-caught species of parrot is in place. Yet illegal pet trade continues for a lot of species of parrots. Parrots are common in the pet trade, and a lot of pet parrots come from illegal sources. Now, some are raised in captivity, and places like in the United States have tried to do a really good job to make sure that happens. That isn't always the case, though. There are people who are very sneaky about getting around the laws and finding ways to make it work in order to make some money. Before you get a parrot as a pet, consider a couple of things. Look into that specific species. Check how long it lives. Are you ready for a commitment for that amount of time? The big guys, the macaws, and the cockatoos can live about 80 years. So that's a pet you will probably have the rest of your life, and possibly need to make arrangements for who that pet goes and lives with after you're no longer here. Some of those smaller ones, like the Amazons, can still live into like their 30s and 40s. The little guys, like the conures and like the budgies, they typically live around in their 20s, possibly 30s, if they're well taken care of. So they can live very long lives. They can also be very, very noisy. I have lived with some parrots as pets, and they can be very, very loud. And I never even had any of the real loud ones. I have worked with some of the real loud ones in zoo settings, and it was a little crazy at times. They can also be pretty destructive. Most parrots out in the wild break a lot of tree branches apart to get to different food sources, or to kind of help build their nesting area. They usually nest in like a cavity of a tree. So they find a little hole in a tree, and then they kind of dig at that to make it big enough that they can fit inside and lay their eggs in it. So a parrot in a cage at home will also still have some of those instincts to tear things apart. And that's something you need to be prepared of if you're going to have a parrot as a pet. Provide it lots of things it can tear apart in a safe way so it doesn't destroy its home or your home in the process. Now, the parrot group can range in size from pretty small, about 3.5 inches, up to over 3 feet for the biggest. The biggest ones are called hyacinth macaws. When I worked at the Phoenix Zoo, we had some hyacinth macaws that lived there. They're gorgeous species of parrots. They're really dark, almost purplish blue color. Really gorgeous birds, but they are huge. They make other macaws look quite a bit smaller. So they can be very big, although even though they're huge in size, they still don't weigh that much, typically weighing less than 5 pounds. Now, for all these species of parrots, almost 400 species, about a third of all parrot species are listed as endangered. And there have been about 20 species that have gone extinct over the last like 200 years throughout the world, and many that are listed as critically endangered. Things don't look very hopeful for them. So one thing that's really cool about parrots is that they typically pair bond, which means that a male and a female parrot form a very lifelong lasting relationship, and they will be mates for life. And they typically will reinforce their pair bond by grooming each other. They kind of lay claim to their nest, but don't really have a territory outside of that. They'll protect right around their nest area, but otherwise they're pretty social and sometimes live in very big groups. Now, with parrots, scientists have kind of grouped them into 3 large families. So the first family is called the true parrots, and that's the biggest family. That's most of all parrots. That includes all the African species of parrots, the big macaws, which are from South America, the Amazons, which are also South America, many of the island species across the Pacific Ocean and throughout the South Pacific, and then also the lories and the lorikeets. The lorikeets got their own special critter chat because I've worked with lorikeets, and then many of the other little island species throughout Indonesia and up into Asia are also all part of that true parrot family. Now, there's also a parrot family called the cockatoos. So that includes most species that will have a little crest of feathers that they can stand up upright onto the top of their head. So that includes the smaller version, which is also called a cockatiel, and then palm cockatoos, black cockatoos, pink, gray, yellow, and white cockatoos. When I went to Australia, I was very surprised to see cockatoos are just like our pigeons. Here in the US, we have pigeons all over, right? In Australia, they have cockatoos, big, beautiful white cockatoos with yellow crests, sulfur-crested cockatoos all over. They were in the trees at the house I was staying at in Sydney, in the backyard in the mornings. They were bathing in a mud puddle along the side of the road when I went up north to the Gold Coast, or not north of Sydney. And I was really surprised at how many cockatoos I saw during my time in Australia. The third family of parrots are the New Zealand parrots, and this includes some really unique species, one of which is called the kea. Keas are masters at problem solving. They're highly regarded as one of the most intelligent problem solving parrots. Typically a kea in captivity can do a lot of things to like get an object out of a jar or do different steps to help get the nut or the seed out of like a feeding apparatus. They're very, very smart. They also live up high in the mountains. They live in an area where it gets cold, where it actually snows. They live on the New Zealand mountains called the Southern Alps. They can also be very destructive to cars. They will typically pull apart car windshield wipers and radio antennas and can cause quite a bit of damage. There's also another New Zealand species of parrot called the kakapo. Kakapos are very big. They're almost the size of a small chicken, and they live on the ground. They don't fly. They kind of hop around quite a bit, but they are extremely rare. They are listed as critically endangered. And there's a big reason for that, and that's one of the major threats that parrots face, and that is from introduced species. New Zealand, before Western people came and settled on New Zealand had no land-based mammals and very few land-based reptiles or amphibians. With that being said, there's a ton of birds in New Zealand that lay their eggs right on the ground because there was nothing around to eat the parents or eat the eggs or eat the babies. Because most of the animals that lived in New Zealand either lived in the ocean or were little tiny lizards, or there's a kind of a bigger lizard there. We'll talk about that another time. And also, there were no mammals anywhere on the island, so there weren't things like cats or rats. And when Europeans first arrived in New Zealand, a lot of rats came with them and started to cause trouble eating a lot of these bird species that nested on the ground. And so then the people in New Zealand thought, oh, let's introduce weasels or a stoat, which is a type of weasel, that will eat the rats. Well, the stoats did a good job of eating lots of the rats, but now the stoats are also eating the birds. So there's a huge effort underway in New Zealand to make their islands free of rats or stoats so that their endangered birds that are still around can exist. Some of their species have gone extinct, unfortunately. So we briefly talked about introduced species have caused a lot of problem. There's a species of lorikeet called the red-throated lorikeet that lives on the islands of Fiji. Between 2001 and 2012, they sent 4 survey groups out into the forest of Fiji to look for the birds and never once found any. So they assumed that that species is probably now extinct, or if it exists, it's less than 50 individuals. The forests of Fiji are pretty remote and tropical, so it's pretty difficult to go to all the spots, but they never saw or heard one. And those birds, if they are extinct, is also because of the same sort of thing, introduced species like rats, snakes, and cats that are now on the islands. Habitat destruction is another big issue that has caused a lot of problem for many of the parrots, particularly in South America. that live along the coastal areas of, say, like Brazil, where some of the huge cities in Brazil exist today. Cities like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, both are bigger than Los Angeles. And in building those cities, and those cities continue to expand and grow, and then the farms to support food for those cities are further out, have cut down a lot of forest and caused a lot of problems for any of the animals that lived in those coastal forests of Brazil. Climate change has also caused a lot of problems, particularly on many of the island species of parrots. Warmer temperatures have caused changes in the weather that have caused severe flooding, severe droughts, wildfires like in Australia this past year. All those can be attributed to our Earth continuing to rise in temperature. That has caused a huge problem for many of the species of tropical animals throughout the world. And then the final threat facing a lot of parrots is pollution and disease. Many times people bring diseases with them. Parrots can get a lot of those diseases, and pollution is a big problem for a lot of different bird species. Some birds have traditionally been used to help monitor air quality. If you've ever heard the phrase canary in a coal mine, they would actually take little canaries, little yellow songbirds, down into a coal mine, and if the canary fell off its perch and died or got really sick, they would know that the air was really bad, and the canary would show signs of the air being bad before any of the people would really show signs of bad air. So that is where that phrase comes from, but that's particularly true for birds. They have very sensitive respiratory or breathing systems that really do not respond well to pollution. Now, we've talked about a lot of negative things with parrots and the threats they face. I want to also talk about another interesting situation with parrots, and that is feral populations. So that's parrots that live in places where parrots didn't used to live. One of those is here in Los Angeles. In LA, we have over 12 different species, over a dozen species of parrots that live in LA year-round, wild populations, feral populations. So how did they get here? They are escaped or released pets. They started noticing them back in the 1950s and 60s, and then over time, different members of the same species have found each other and started to reproduce. So here in LA, we see yellow chevron parakeets, which are a pretty big parakeet species. I see those a lot. I have seen them here in my backyard. Although I've never seen them land in my backyard, I've seen them fly over. I've seen them at the LA Zoo when I worked there, and I have seen them in various parts around Los Angeles. There are also red-headed Amazons that live over near LA in Pasadena that are quite the scene over there. Some people get very mad because they like to destroy some of the flowers and fruits that grow in the area. And because people like to plant a lot of different fruit trees or flowering trees or bushes in their yard, these parrots take advantage of those quite often. When I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, we had a similar situation going on with little lovebirds called peach-faced lovebirds. There were peach-faced lovebirds that lived in and around the Phoenix Zoo when I worked there, and also in my neighborhood there. So feral populations of parrots exist in many places of the United States and in several cities in Europe. Particularly California, Texas, and Florida, which are all kind of warmer states, have lots of feral populations of parrots. But sometimes they survive in colder weather places too. I know that there's a population of parrots in Chicago and also up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. So sometimes they can adapt to places that are a little colder because they find ways to stay warm during the winter. Now let's talk about some progress on some parrot species that are threatened or endangered and some work that's being done to help them. One of the first parrot species that I became familiar with as a zoo professional is a species of parrot called the thick-billed parrot. They're a unique parrot in that they actually lived historically in the United States. Today they just live in Mexico. They no longer live in Arizona or New Mexico where they used to live. They kind of disappeared from the United States during the middle of the last century, so like the 1950s and 60s, as more people started moving into Arizona and New Mexico, the parrots kind of moved out or disappeared. There have been efforts to breed them in a zoo setting. That's gone somewhat well, somewhat not. And in the 1980s, they tried to reintroduce them into the mountains near Tucson, Arizona, which that also did not go well. The parrots that they were reintroducing had lived too long under human care. They didn't know how to fly very well, and they didn't know how to watch out for predators. And hawks in the area were very quick to see the parrots as a new food source. And unfortunately, that effort did not go well. There are still thick-billed parrots that live in areas of Mexico, although it is estimated that there are less than 2,000 individuals that live there. We did have thick-billed parrots at the Phoenix Zoo when I worked there. They were still trying to breed them and help people become more aware that there used to be a parrot that lived in Arizona. There are other parrot species that are having a lot of conservation work done for them. There's two big organizations that are our special shout out today. One is Parrots International, the other is the World Parrot Trust. Both of them are nonprofit organizations that are doing some good work for conservation for wild parrot populations. Also, in my time at the Los Angeles Zoo and during my training to become a zookeeper there, I worked with several different macaw species and also some cockatoo species. They were always a little intimidating and sometimes very particular about new people, so I did not work with them very closely. But shortly after leaving the LA Zoo, they had some very big success with a very rare species of macaw that they have called the blue-throated macaw. The blue-throated macaw was thought to be extinct in 1992, but then they found about 50 of them. I believe they're from Bolivia down in South America. And there's a pair of them that live at the Los Angeles Zoo, and they had a blue-throated macaw chick, I believe last year. And so that was very good news from them. The estimated global population for blue-throated macaws is now between 300 and 400. There's also a lot of work being done for the African gray parrots. African gray parrots are highly regarded as being very intelligent for their ability to speak. There was one particular African gray parrot named Alex who had learned over 2,000 words. He could also recognize different colors, shapes, and numbers. He had 80% success rate in being able to do simple math or count things. He was right 80% of the time in the working with his researcher. So they're highly regarded as being very intelligent and very good at learning words. Most African gray parrots are either first generation born in a captive setting or actually caught wild in Africa and brought to the United States. So they are not the best of pets to be had. They can be very loud, they can be very destructive, and they can become very stressed easily if they are not given enough stimulation and mental exercises throughout their day. So they are a very tricky species to take care of. I do remember when I went to Zoo Atlanta in Atlanta, Georgia, they had a very big exhibit of African gray parrots that had been confiscated from people who did not have the correct paperwork, bringing them into the US. And they also were trying to breed some African gray parrots and help people understand that parrot species, although they're intelligent and really cool because they can talk very well, they may not always be the best of pets. Well, I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today about parrots. This full episode will be uploaded later today onto Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So if you missed part of it, feel free to watch it later on today. I'll also be posting some great things about some parrots and our shout out conservation organizations later today on the Facebook profile. But that is it for me for today's Critter Chat. So take care, have fun, and I will see you tomorrow. All right, bye.